I'd like to have one of the outlines of the lesson for this morning. You raise your hand, one of those men in the back, be more than happy to give it to you. Well, that's being done. In the book of John, in the 10th chapter, you find the Lord is giving one of his parables, and this is the parable of the Good Shepherd. He sets himself forth as the door to the sheepfold, and the only way into that sheepfold properly is by him, of course. And there are those he speaks of who enter in that are not following his will. They come in another way, and they come in, and notice in verse 10 and 11 as he explains this to his disciples. He says, "Now the thief cometh not, but for to steal, to kill, to destroy." But he contrasts himself then, and he says, "I am come that they might have life, and that they might have it more abundantly." Now his desire for this, he sets forth in the next verse. He says, "I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd giveth his life for the sheep." In other words, he wants us to have an abundant life. How much do you want it? Well, how much do we want it is the question. His is beyond question, because he hung upon the cross that we can have that life that each of us so should desire. The song we sang, what shall it profit a man if he gain the whole world and lose his own soul? Well, it's not going to profit anything, but what is going to miss out on, what we might miss out on that case, is that abundant life that God gives. But be assured, there are those who want to take that away. Some do it out of ignorance, some out of striving to have a following, some out of malice in other ways. But the fact is, if they take it from us, and if we don't use it, then in fact, we're a miserable people. You look and you find in the book of Hebrews, and that's where we're going to look. We're going to go over to the book of Hebrews, the 13th chapter, and examine some things about this abundant life, about living it. But you look at the book of Hebrews, and what you have is a book in which there were individuals who were striving to take those who were following the will of God and to move them away from it, to have them to return to the old way that they had left in order to become children of God. And what the writer does in the book of Hebrews is to set forth this better way. In other words, the way you're following is a way that is good and proper. It's God's will. But above that, even it is the better way. Under the old law, there were good things. It was good to be a follower of God. But to return to it is horrible because you lose out on the better things. That word better is used about 13 times in the book of Hebrews. So it seems that that's something that he wanted the writers to understand as he was inspired by God to give this message. And whenever you look at that book, you find in Hebrews, the first chapter, in verse 4, we have a better messenger. That is Jesus Christ, who is better than the angels. The old covenant being given, not sure exactly all of the ins and outs of that, but by means of angels. He says, but we have a better messenger, better than the angels. We have a better life through steadfastness, he speaks of in Hebrews, the 6th chapter. We have a better hope in Hebrews, the 7th chapter. We have a better covenant in Hebrews, the 7th chapter. We have a covenant with better promises in Hebrews, the 8th chapter. In Hebrews, the 9th chapter, we find that we have that better thing that is there by better sacrifices. And then in Hebrews, the 10th chapter, we have in heaven a better and more enduring substance. You think about that. This world is going to pass away and all that is in it. But we have an enduring substance in heaven. Whenever Jesus said in John 14, I go to prepare a place for you. It's not a fleeting place. It's not a place that will not endure. We will be there if we desire to live the abundant life here and receive the better promises there. We will be there for all eternity. What an amazing blessing that is. And then he goes to chapter 11, and he gives what many call the roll call of faith, but it's examples of those who by faith demonstrated the life that they should live. We could just park there and look at what those individuals did, the life they lived, the decisions they made. But the reasons are set forth, for example, in verse 16, there is a better country, that is a heavenly that they look for. There is a better resurrection in verse 35. But you look in the end of that, in verse 39 through 40, it says, these, having obtained a good report through faith, receive not the promise. Wait a minute, they lived this good life. They didn't get what we have before us, and they have before them, but it's yet to be given. But he points out that God, having provided some better thing for us, that they without us should not be made perfect. In other words, completion is not going to come. And so we look at that and we see, well, what are we going to do then? Chapter 12, he tells us that we are compassed about with these great cloud of witnesses, but he sends us then to the focus upon Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith. He's that supreme example. He's the one who provides that abundant life, who gave his life for you and I, if in fact we are his sheep. So you look at that, Jesus died to give us this. The book of Hebrews sets forth all of these better things. Then you get to chapter 13. And this is the chapter that a lot of people, as they look at it, they say this is the book of practicality. Some people would use the vernacular of today. This is where the rubber meets the road. This is where things are put into action. Well, Hebrews the 11th chapter did that, but in Hebrews the 13th chapter, we find an exhortation to us, which I believe gives us a picture of what the abundant life will be, should be, if we follow God. So we can look at this and we can ask ourselves, I want that abundant life. I'm so happy that Jesus died for me. I'm so happy about those who have lived before, who set forth that marvelous example. But am I really living like that's the truth? You see, the abundant life is something that is displayed. Who we are, the way we live, the way we talk. All of these things are set forth if we follow God. So we look at Hebrews the 13th chapter. And he begins by saying, let brotherly love continue. Now, through the remaining verses, down through verse 6, he really continues in that theme of brotherly love. I think they're connected to that. But I'm going to separate it out, as in your notes, and look at various aspects of what I believe demonstrate that living the abundant life. And so living the abundant life, first of all, is going to exhibit brotherly love. Now, this morning in the class up here, Greg was talking about love, agape love, in 1 Corinthians, the 13th chapter. That's the supreme love. But there is another love, and that is the brotherly love. Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love, it's phileo. But it is that love that has a consideration, a care, a concern, a heart that is feeling with those round about. And so he says, let brotherly love continue. You look at that and you think about how Jesus points out what love our life will do. We could go all over the place, but if you look at Matthew the 5th chapter in verse 16, let your light so shine that men may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven. Now that's going to come from a heart that's filled with love. My interaction with you is a heart that's filled with brotherly love. People are going to see who we are. And so we make a difference not only in our lives, but those lives that we touch. I hope that you know that I love you with that agape love. By the way, that's a command. But also brotherly love is a command. That compassion, that feeling, we'll discuss several aspects of it. But you look at that and he says this is something that's going to set you apart from the world. Because sadly, a lot of society is like Paul spoke of when he related back to sending Timothy. He said, I'm going to send Timothy unto you. Why? He says, I have no man like-minded who will naturally look upon the things of another. Brotherly love. I love you. It's in my heart. I was walking downstairs. I generally go through the building and I'll check the doors and just look and make sure that nothing's going on, odd from the outside. And I will pause by classes and listen to some things said. And in one of the classes, there was a man teaching some of the young adults, and I heard him make the statement, what is in your heart is going to eventually come out. Well, that's true. It's not that which goes in, but that which proceeds from the heart. You keep your heart with all diligence. Out of it are the issues of life. If I do not have this brotherly love, it's going to come out. It's going to show how I interact with others. And so I have to have this as such that it sets me apart, that it shows who I am. I'm going to let that brotherly love continue. I am going to have a brotherly love that is going to demonstrate my interaction, my care for you, my concern for you, my love for you by the way that I act. But then he goes on and he says in verse 2, and it's continuing on. Like I said, these are pretty well tied with love, as you will see. But notice what he says. Be not forgetful to entertain strangers, for thereby some have entertained angels unaware. So I look and I think of that and I say, okay, living the abundant life means that I will exhibit hospitality. That word translated as entertain strangers is elsewhere translated as hospitality. For example, one who desires the office of an elder, he is to be given to hospitality. But if you look in Romans the 12th chapter, verse 13, in our text here, same thing. I mean, it isn't just, well, you're an elder, you're to be hospitable. Well, yeah, I am. Why? Because I'm a Christian. So are you. Live like it. Entertain strangers, and that doesn't mean put on a play for them. You look in one writer I read, he says this means you exhibit this cheerful love for others. What? The brotherly love. In other words, this is going to be something that I am going to show forth what this person really means to me. Who? A brotherly love. But lest we think that the church is just a self-centered group, he says, don't be forgetful to entertain strangers. Now he goes on and he says, some have entertained angels unawares. You're not going to entertain an angel today, but that did happen, Genesis 18 and 19, with Abraham and Sarah. They entertained strangers who were, in fact, angels. They didn't know it at the time. And you look at that, and sometimes we don't know. I look at that and I say, okay, I'm not going to entertain an angel, but I never know who I'm interacting with and what that's going to mean, how it's going to influence the lives of others, whether that's going to be the prompting that will encourage them to examine their life and live that life that is filled with love, but brotherly love also. I want to be part of this. I want to live this life in such a way that I can exhibit this, that others desire to know about it. Now, the importance of entertaining strangers, that is being a part of the lives of others. Now, I'll go to a sideline. Atlanta and I talk at times, and we talk about various things, but one of the things that comes up a lot of times, we're worried about the church. Why? Something going on? Oh, we're blessed. We have a good congregation. But what about that idea of brotherly love? Not just one little group. We be brethren. Are we exhibiting it to everybody? Sometimes I jokingly talk about those on the west might meet those on the east. Well, that may be a joke, but sometimes it comes to reality that we do not have that brotherly love. We're blessed with a congregation that's a good size, but it's not so big that we can't know and exhibit brotherly love to everyone. And whenever we entertain strangers, it could be visitors to the congregation, or we, sometimes brotherly love. I love you so much. And a visitor just goes by and we never even meet them. Okay, he said, don't do that. Don't be forgetful to entertain strangers. In other words, we can do it all, but it means that we have to do that within here. And one of the concerns Lana and I talk about, and I guess her more than me, is the interaction at other times. Do we ever open up our homes to one another? Do we know each other rather than at the building? This goes, you go back in the brotherly love. You are to have brotherly love and honor, preferring one another. Who's your closest friend? Who do you prefer to be around? Well, if you're married, I hope it's your spouse. But other than that, are you closer with people in the world than you are within the church? Is your interaction with strangers such that you're going to set forth the church? Or is it you prefer to be around them rather than those in the church? You see, God puts it in a package here. And we need to realize that the church is a body. 1 Corinthians, the 12th chapter. Greg talked about that in Bible class last week a bit. And you think about how every part is important. Well, if my body, I've got what they call post-concussion syndrome. I'm amazed I remember that, Mark. But what it means to me is sometimes this disconnects, and I may have trouble concentrating. And sometimes I may lose my balance. I may get dizzy. It aggravates me. Why? I have this body, and it needs to work together for me to do my best. We have a body. We're each part of the body of Christ. And whenever we fail to have that brotherly love, whenever we fail to be hospitable, the body's not working like it should. We're hindering it. And so I look and I see this hospitality, that it is a demonstration really of brotherly love, and it's also an illustration of love itself. And then it goes on and it talks about, that if I live this abundant life, I'm going to be a person who has empathy. Notice in verse 3, he says, remember them that are in bonds, as bound with them, and them which suffer adversity, as being yourselves also in the body. You look and, you see the things that people go through. We offer prayers. We have a prayer list in the bulletin. We have a prayer list posted in the foyer, and we get up and we will pray. I pray that Jack and his feeble mind will get better. That's the end of it. No. Does it, whenever I hit something, if I hit it hard, this hand's going to go over and say, oh, man, why? Because it's felt throughout the body. Empathy is that awareness, sensitivity, a vicarious feeling of thoughts and experience of another. You ever gone somewhere? I feel for you, brother. I feel for you, sister. Do we really? Whenever we look at the body, we need to understand that whenever we remember those who are in bonds as being bound, we remember those that suffer adversity, as we ourselves are part of that adversity. It breaks our heart when something happens to another. Well, that's going to relate to a hospitality. It's going to relate to a brotherly love. We're not disconnected. The connection we have is so strong. It is through the body of Christ, the blood that was shed. We are one. We are united through that sacrifice of Christ, and we ought to feel that with one another. But sometimes we can become a bit hardened to the things that others go through. We don't have empathy. It looks, it's terrible. Oh, hope they get better. And like James, go that way. Be filled. Be warm. Well, faith, love, our hospitality, they're connected and fueled by fueling one another with that empathy. That we look and we see and feel what others do. Matthew, the 7th chapter, in verse 12, is what many people call the golden rule. He says, whatsoever you would that men should do unto you, do ye also unto them. If I let it be known, and sometimes people, they don't give a chance for empathy. Number one, they're not involved, they're not hospitable, they're not involved with others. So nobody knows what's going on in their life, and they like to have it that way. Well, that's sad. We need to quit that. We need to realize we're in this together and we can bear one another's burdens, Galatians 6 and verse 2. And then you have those who will say, I'd like to have such and such added to the prayer list. When was the last time that you I sat down, looked at the prayer list, and sincerely offered a prayer on their behalf? I mean, if I tell you, I'm going to undergo a lobotomy, pray for me. I don't want you to say, oh, that's interesting, and go on. I need your prayers. I need you to be concerned about me. That's why I set it forth. Brethren, is that us? It ought to be. We are to be, if we're living the abundant life, this is it. I'm not alone. I've got you. You've got me. We are empathetic. We are hospitable. We have brotherly love. But then he broadens it. In verse 4, he talks about the idea that we need to have a marital purity. Notice what he said. Some people think, well, this is all out of touch. No. Verse 4, he says, marriage is honorable in all, and the bed undefiled, but the whoremongers and the adulterers God will judge. Okay, what does that have to do with living the abundant life? Where do you think the members of the church come from? Families. Where do members of society come from? Families. The psalmist pondered the question, if the foundation be destroyed, what then shall the righteous do? Look at society. Look at what comes into the church. You see, marriage is to be recognized as a foundation. The home is the society, the action, the part that fuels everything else. Our life comes from this. Now, in society, the pendulum just swings back and forth about whether the home, marriage, is anything at all. But notice what he said. He says, now marriage, the home, the family, is honorable. You know how else that word is translated? 10 of 14 times, and I just look it up. If you don't know how to look it up, I'll show you how. You don't have to be any type of scholar. You just need to be able to punch a button. 10 times out of 14, it's not translated as honorable. It's translated as precious. What would our society be like? What would our congregation be like if every single home was looked at as precious? Well, sometimes we put our focus anywhere and everywhere, but what about home? I always tell people, the book of Acts talks about as the gospel was begun to be preached in its fullness, he says, you shall be my witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, the uttermost parts of the world. If you read the book of Acts, it's like a spiral going out. Where do you start? Where you are. The church is precious. Society can be precious. The home is the foundation, the start of that preciousness. The home is where you start. I've known preachers going to save the world. They left their home behind. You can do all sorts of things, but if you're not a Noah, you know who Noah was? Preacher of righteousness. What Peter said. And yet, he saved 8 souls. If every one of us looked at our home as precious and sought to save the souls of those there. Oh, not just get along. That's part of it. That's the brotherly love. That's the hospitality. That's the empathy. But if we don't recognize it as precious, we're going to lose everything. I got kids, grandkids, professionals. Good. You know what's awesome? Christian home. Jared, he's mentioned in class, that his parents, it's me and Lana, told him, you can do anything, you can be anything. That was always put with a modifier. Be a good Christian. We don't care what you do in life as long as you're a good Christian. And a good Christian is going to take care of you. You consider the home precious. Marriage is honorable. Marriage is precious. You think we're going to have trouble with a man understanding what a man ought to be, a woman understanding what a woman ought to be, children understanding what it ought to be to obey the parents, parents understanding what it ought to be to guide the children, bring them up not just to be successful, but bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. Be that example. Be able to be a Paul who says, follow me as I follow Christ. If marriage is not precious, then that's horrible. He goes on and he talks about the marriage bed is undefiled. He then says that not only is the marriage bed undefiled, but he says, but those who are in love with one another, those who just love each other so much they can't contain. No. He gives a horrible picture. Here is what marriage is. The bed is undefiled. There's only one proper place for sex. That is in the marriage bond. Outside of that, he mentions no words. He says there, whoremongers and adulterers, God will judge. See it. It's either honorable or it's disgusting. Yeah. Again, if we look at marriage and we consider it living the abundant life, I want a home that is so amazing. Do it God's way. I spoke with a man last night, expecting a child in a few days. His wife is. And we were talking about that, and they're not married. Kind of got the cart before the horse here, bud. Did I preach at the church right over across the parking lot? I'll be glad to talk to you and this woman who is about to have your child and tell you how you can have a home that is so amazing. But you got to follow God. What he's going to do with it. But it's sad. He was so excited about bringing a child into this world. Well, I hope the child will do well and be followers of God, but it's going to be horrible if mom and dad aren't too. You see, the home can be such an amazing, amazing thing that contributes so much to our life and the lives around about us, have an influence on the church, had an influence on society. And then he goes on and he speaks in verse 5. He speaks about contentment. He points out there that we are to be without covetousness and be content. Well, that's an earmark because we seek God first, Matthew 6:33. We're not going to serve God in mammon. We make the choice. We're going to serve God. And we have a trust in God, a fearless trust in God in verse 6. We're not going to have that fear that is there. Revelation 21 and verse 8, you think about the horrible things keep you out of heaven. Adultery, murder. Fearful. What? Yeah, fear. Can't do this. If I do this, what's going to happen? If I live like this, you know what it's going to come. All these things are fear that the devil allows you to let foster in your life to grow, control your life. You don't follow God. God says you trust in him because I will never leave you nor forsake you. You know the stronger emphasis of it? He is your helper. Sometimes, just like we don't reach out to brethren, we'll reach out to God. And then you find the doctrinal purity. In verse 7 through 16, he talks about the idea of those who are elders, who have the rule, and they're to be obeyed. Well, there is a doctrinal purity that leads to, in verse 17, an order and unity. You see, elders have the responsibility to, first of all, follow the will of God themselves, but also to set that forth, to make sure that the flock is fed in a proper way, that things that are done in an orderly fashion that is the best expedient way. And they make these decisions. Verse 17, you follow that. You make sure that it's according to the will of God, but in those matters of judgment and such, you follow. Why? Congregation that's not unified is in terrible trouble. 1 Corinthians 1, verse 10 and following, the Apostle Paul spoke about He had concerns that there were divisions among them, and he said, I rightly believe it. What was the answer? In verse 10, you be of the same mind, same judgment. You speak the same thing. No, there's an order that is there. It's a doctrinal purity. You cannot live a life that is separated, divisive, after Jesus himself, John 17, prayed for unity. In Ephesians, the 2nd chapter, he died for unity. And then, well, I don't care. I don't matter getting along. No, God's got an order. He has an organization. He has an abundant life. Let's work for it together. That's really what he's emphasizing. What a grand and wonderful life that we can have. You know, you look at that, and he concludes and gives many admonitions in the book about the prayerful life we live, about being doers of the words, about desiring to be with others, a readiness to receive and give, the gracious attitudes to one another. But I ask, how can I do this? How can I live the abundant life? First of all, you've got to be in that sheepfold. Jesus is the door. That's the only way. In this world, people, live your life, go this way is salvation. No, Jesus is the way, the life. No man coming to the Father but by him. And it's he that said the way in is believing and being baptized, Mark 16. You find another way, show me. I'll preach it. But you better show me the book. But if you don't find another way, will you love him enough, John 14, verse 15, to obey his command? Whenever you do that, you become a child of God. And you have access to the abundant life. How do I know that? Ephesians 1 and verse 3. All spiritual blessings in heavenly places are found in Christ Jesus. What did Jesus promise in John 10? Abundant life. On the spiritual blessings. We can love it. We can